How is it possible that a single man made the greatest empire in history shake to its very foundations? He was not an emperor, he was not a god, but his will was unyielding. While Rome marched like an invincible machine, he appeared riding elephants, crossing impossible mountains, driven by a single purpose: to destroy the Roman Republic. Today, you will discover the story of the man who turned war into art and defeat into eternal glory. But before we embark on this journey through the battlefields of the past, subscribe to the channel, share this video, and tell us in the comments which other legendary name you want to see here. Now hold tight, because we're going to cross the Alps with the most feared general of antiquity. In the heart of the ancient world, two powers were rising in opposite directions, separated by the sea, yet united by destiny. On one side, Rome, a city forged in the iron of swords, hardened by the discipline of legions, fueled by myths and ambitions that knew no boundaries. On the other, Carthage, a shining jewel of Mediterranean commerce, born of the Phoenicians, enriched by spices, precious metals, and the cunning of its navigators. Rome marched forward. Every step of its legions imposed a new law, a new language, a new order. Where its standards were raised, kings fell, and cultures were swallowed by its war machine. It was not just a city, it was an idea that expanded like a red tide. Meanwhile, Carthage did not need spears to dominate. Its ships ruled the sea routes, its markets overflowed with riches, and its influence spread like perfume in a sealed room. Power came from gold, ivory, silent agreements, and alliances sealed with wine and parchment. But the balance was fragile. Rome desired control of the Mediterranean. Carthage already possessed it. Collision was inevitable. And then, the spark, Sicily. The island between the two colossi became the stage for the First Punic War. What began as local disputes quickly exploded into brutal conflict. For more than 20 years, the sea became a battlefield. Carthage relied on its experienced fleet. Rome, with no naval tradition, built a navy from scratch and learned quickly, very quickly. With every Carthaginian ship sunk, Rome's pride swelled. With every defeat, Carthage's hatred fermented. In the end, Carthage lost the war. And more than that, it lost territory, lost prestige, and began to lose patience. But defeating an enemy does not mean erasing it. Sometimes, it only means awakening the monster that lay beneath its own wounded pride. And in the silent streets of Carthage, among columns and shadows, a new name began to take shape: Barca. A name that would transform wounds into war and vengeance into legacy. Carthage was on its knees. The First Punic War had ended, but its scars were far from healed. The peace treaty imposed by Rome was not only severe, it was an affront. Carthage had to surrender the island of Sicily, hand over part of its fleet, and pay an absurd amount in tribute. But what really hurt was the shame. The Carthaginian people, proud of their Phoenician heritage and their feats at sea, now walked in silence. The once boastful voices of merchants and generals now echoed bitterly through the markets. Taxes weighed heavily on everyone's pockets. In the streets, one name was murmured with disdain: Rome. But among all those who felt that humiliation, one man transformed it into fuel: Hamilcar Barca, a war veteran, a fierce strategist, an unyielding patriot. He did not accept defeat as an end. For Hamilcar, every clause of that treaty was a personal insult. And while Carthage's politicians tried to heal the wounds with diplomacy, he was plotting another path: revenge. But Hamilcar was far too clever to attack directly. He knew that facing Rome would require more than mere will. It would require a new center of power, and he found that center to the north, in the fertile and rich lands of the Iberian Peninsula, Hispania. Leading a loyal army, Hamilcar set out for that wild and promising land. There, he acted not just as a conqueror. He acted as the architect of a new empire. He subdued tribes, built fortresses, extracted silver, and forged alliances with both sword and gold. With each city dominated, with each mine exploited, Carthage was reborn, but silently, beyond Rome's reach. And with him a young boy followed, a boy with intense eyes and a restless soul, his eldest son, Hannibal. Hamilcar did not take him along for protection, but to be molded. From a young age, the boy learned that war was not only about battles, but about purpose, that Rome was not just a people, but a threat, and that revenge could be a legacy. In a dark ritual before the sacred fire of the Carthaginian gods, Hamilcar made Hannibal swear never to be a friend of Rome. That was not just any promise, it was a sentence. Sometimes a war begins with a simple whisper. Hannibal was only 9 years old when his father led him through the depths of an ancient Carthaginian temple. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of incense and the sacred silence of a place where ancient gods still listened. There were no soldiers, no advisors, no witnesses, just a father, a son, and a flickering flame before an ancestral altar. There, under the gaze of forgotten deities, the boy was forced to touch a sacred vessel and repeat the words that would mark the course of his life and the history of the world. "I will never be a friend of Rome. I will never cease to fight against it." It was not a child's oath. It was the foundation of an obsession. While other children played or learned poetry, Hannibal grew up surrounded by swords, shields, and blood. His childhood was forged in marches, military camps, and trenches. His toys were maps. His teachers were generals hardened by combat. When Hamilcar died in battle, some say betrayed by Iberian allies, Hannibal did not cry. Grief became fuel. The boy, now a teenager, was embraced by the army as a living symbol of the mission's continuity. Command passed to his brother-in-law Hasdrubal, who maintained Carthaginian expansion in Hispania. But it was only a matter of time before the young lion took the reins. And when that moment came, there was no hesitation. Hannibal was hailed by the soldiers, a young general, but already with the gaze of someone carrying a purpose greater than personal glory: to destroy Rome. In the Roman Senate, the names Barca and Hispania began to send chills down their spines. But few there understood the depth of the threat that was growing beyond the horizon. They believed that Carthage, humiliated, would never rise again. Little did they know that a boy forged by pain was about to become the nightmare of an entire republic. Rome had won the war, but in the shadows, the true war had only just begun. Sometimes genius reveals itself in the impossible. While the Roman senators toasted to stability and discussed territorial expansions, Hannibal was preparing to break all the rules of war. Already in command of Carthaginian forces in Hispania, he traveled through the provinces, organizing armies, gathering tribal support, accumulating resources. But above all, he was planning, and his plan was so bold, it bordered on insanity. The provocation did not take long. Saguntum, a city allied with Rome but located in territory Carthage considered its own, became the spark. Hannibal attacked, a move that Rome could not ignore. The conflict was officially reignited. But this time, Hannibal would not wait for the war to come. He would take it directly to the heart of the enemy, and then the unthinkable happened. With more than 50,000 soldiers, thousands of horses, and around 40 war elephants, Hannibal set off to the north. He crossed the Pyrenees, he crossed Gaul, and finally, the Alps. Yes, the Alps. Treacherous, frozen, unexplored mountains, a frozen graveyard for any sensible army. But Hannibal was not an ordinary general. He faced snowstorms, hostile tribes, deadly landslides. Many soldiers froze to death, some deserted. The elephants, symbols of his audacity, fell on the steep slopes, overcome by the altitude and the cold. But Hannibal pressed on, and against all logic, he made it. When the Roman legions saw the enemy army descending from the snowy mountains of Italy, the disbelief was absolute. How had someone done that? How had one man turned the impossible into reality and appeared like an armed ghost in Rome's own backyard? The answer was simple: willpower. The Second Punic War began with a thunderclap that came from the south, echoed through the mountains, and announced that the most powerful republic in the world was about to be challenged like never before. And Hannibal, he was not there to intimidate. He was there to destroy. Rome was not accustomed to losing, but Hannibal was determined to rewrite that story, battle by battle. After crossing the Alps, he wasted no time. His victories began to stack up like bricks in a monument to Roman humiliation. Ticinus, Trebia, Lake Trasimene. In each confrontation, Hannibal did not just win, he demoralized. He destroyed entire legions, shattered Roman arrogance, and proved that his tactics were centuries ahead of his time. But the best was yet to come. In 216 BC, Rome, desperate to end the threat, organized the largest army in its history up to that point. More than 80,000 legionaries, led by 2 consuls eager to prove their worth. The objective: to crush Hannibal once and for all. The stage: Cannae, a plain in southern Italy. For the Romans, the field was perfect. Wide, open, ideal for their numerical superiority. Hannibal, outnumbered, seemed cornered. They were certain that that day would mark the end of the Carthaginian nightmare. But Hannibal did not plan to survive. He planned to destroy. He positioned his army in an unusual way, with the center slightly curved backward as if it were ready to break. The flanks, formed by more experienced and agile troops, were held back, almost invisible. An invitation to illusion, and the Romans took the bait. They advanced with full force against the Carthaginian center, believing they were pushing the enemy toward defeat. But they were being lured into the heart of a deadly trap. When Hannibal's central line retreated enough, his flanks closed in like jaws. At the same time, his cavalry, already victorious on the edges, completed the encirclement from behind. Rome was surrounded. There was no escape. There were no reinforcements. Only the suffocating weight of the encirclement closing in. The field of Cannae became a slaughterhouse. Over 50,000 Roman soldiers fell within hours. Senators, generals, veterans, all were cut down like novices before a military genius. The dust turned to mud, the grass to flesh, the ground to history. It was one of the greatest defeats in Rome's history and Hannibal's greatest victory. But even after annihilating half of Rome's military power, he did not march on Rome. Why? That is the question that echoes through the centuries. Some say he was waiting for support from allied cities. Others claim his army needed reinforcements. But at that moment, Rome's fate was as vulnerable as it had ever been. And Hannibal left it standing. Cannae was an open wound. Rome bled like never before. It lost men, it lost pride, it lost confidence. Many believed the city would fall, but Rome was not built with stone and sword alone. It was forged with something deeper: resilience. After the tragedy, panic took over the streets. Families mourned, temples held sacrifices, and the Senate seemed on the brink of collapse. But instead of surrendering, the Republic did the unthinkable. It rose. They recruited new soldiers, young, old, even slaves. They reformed strategies, strengthened the walls, and promised never again to underestimate their enemy. Hannibal was winning every battle, but Rome began to understand that war was a game of endurance. And while Hannibal waited for alliances that never came, on the other side of the sea, a new star began to rise. Publius Cornelius Scipio, young, intelligent, shaped by the defeats he witnessed and survived. Scipio did not just want to defend Rome, he wanted to take the war back to where it had started. He began in Hispania, where Hannibal had built his power base. City by city, Scipio dismantled Hamilcar's legacy. He defeated Hannibal's brothers, broke his supply lines, and shattered his hopes. The Carthaginian general was still on Italian soil, but his empire began to crumble beneath his feet. Then, Scipio made the boldest move of all. He invaded Africa. While Hannibal was still campaigning in Italy, Rome crossed the sea and threatened Carthage on its own territory. It was a risky move, but brilliant. Carthage, terrified, had no choice. They called Hannibal back, years after crossing the Alps, defeating legions and making Rome tremble. The Carthaginian general now had to defend his homeland. But he was no longer the fearless young warrior from the days of Trebia or Cannae. He was a veteran, marked by years of conflict, battles, and frustrated hopes. And on the other side of the field stood Scipio, a student of defeats, ready to teach his own lesson. Two geniuses, two powers, two worlds colliding. The final battle was about to begin at Zama. The African desert whispered omens of war. The winds of Zama carried more than just dust. They carried the weight of destiny. After years of ravaging Italy, Hannibal finally returned to his homeland. But the Carthage he found was not the same. It was a shadow of what it once was, weakened, surrounded, and in panic. And before him, standing firm with a penetrating gaze, was Publius Cornelius Scipio, now called Scipio Africanus. Both knew what was at stake. It was more than a battle. It was the final act of a war that had lasted for decades. Hannibal, a veteran of 1,000 campaigns, still carried his genius. But now he also bore the weight of lost cities, dead brothers, and broken promises. And Scipio, he brought the coldness of strategy, the youth shaped by defeat, and the fresh blood of Roman hope. On the plains of Zama, the armies took their positions. The world held its breath. Hannibal unleashed his first weapon, the feared war elephants, but Scipio was ready for them. He created open corridors between his lines, confusing the animals, which charged forward without causing destruction and even turned back against their own troops. Hannibal's first advantage was neutralized. The hand-to-hand combat was brutal. The Roman infantry, hardened by the campaigns in Hispania, resisted ferociously. The Carthaginian formations, though experienced, were tired. And then came the final blow, the betrayal of the Numidians. Once allies of Carthage, they now fought alongside Rome, attacking the Carthaginian rear with speed and relentless cruelty. Hannibal resisted. He fought with everything he had left. But Zama was not Cannae. The encirclement closed. And the greatest military genius of his era was defeated. Carthage, desolate, was forced to surrender. Its walls were spared, but its soul was torn apart. Its ships burned, its riches confiscated, its ambitions buried under merciless clauses. But the most symbolic part of the defeat was that Hannibal survived and disappeared. He did not become a prisoner. He was not paraded as a trophy. He vanished like a ghost in the mists of history, carrying the pain of defeat, but also the spark of something far greater, a legend that would never be forgotten. Rome won, but not everything that is defeated is erased. After Zama, Hannibal did not return as a prisoner. He returned as a symbol, too troublesome to be celebrated, too dangerous to be forgotten. Even in defeat, he was feared. And Roman fear did not fade with victory. It grew. Watched, hunted, spied upon. Hannibal became an exile from the world. He traveled to distant lands, offering his military mind to kings who still dreamed of halting Rome's advance. In Bithynia, in Syria, wherever there was a throne threatened by Rome, there was someone whispering his name, Hannibal, but Rome was relentless. His name was an open wound in the pride of the Republic. And wherever he went, Rome's shadow followed. There was no peace. There was no rest. Slowly, the Carthaginian general found himself without allies, without refuge, without options. Until, surrounded, old, and without an army, Hannibal made his final choice. He would not fall into enemy hands. He took poison. and he died as he lived, defying Rome until his last breath. But his death was not the end. It was the birth of eternity. Centuries later, generals would study his campaigns. Napoleon Bonaparte would draft plans inspired by his strategies. Wellington, Caesar, Montgomery, all would drink from his genius, because Hannibal was not just a commander, he was a master of war, of will, and of vision. Rome destroyed Carthage. Its walls crumbled, its ships burned, its dreams fell silent. But they did not destroy Hannibal. His story survived the ashes, crossed continents and centuries. From a boy who swore hatred in a temple, he became the man who brought the greatest empire in the world to its knees, with cunning, courage, and elephants crossing mountains. Hannibal lost the war, but he won something that even Rome could not conquer: immortality. Hannibal Barca was neither a king nor an emperor. He did not found a new civilization, did not build temples in his name, nor write philosophical treatises. And yet, he entered into eternity. Because his legacy is not measured by the victories he accumulated, but by the empires he made tremble. He was a man who dared to challenge the impossible, who made his very life a battlefield, where defeat was just another chapter of the legend. Rome, with all its power, won. But to this day, its greatest enemy continues to be remembered. Hannibal teaches us that greatness is not only in conquering, but in resisting, in not giving in fighting until the last step, until the last breath, until the last man. He proved that the will of one can set the world ablaze, and even though history is written by the victors, the names that echo through the centuries are those who refuse to be forgotten. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video and you're passionate about this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming videos and discover more fascinating stories. See you in the next video.